A millionaire CEO took the nanny to a company gala, but what she did shocked everyone. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us from which city you are watching. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. When you think your day cannot get any worse, an arrogant millionaire proves it can. Rachel Morgan was about to find out that the universe had a cruel sense of humor. The heel of her shoe broke right at the entrance of the Prescott mansion, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet garden. Balancing 5 children's books on her right arm, she limped awkwardly when the little mermaid slipped straight into the ornamental fountain. "Great," she muttered. "Ariel is going to meet the bottom of the lake before the prince." The household staff watched from the window like an audience at a reality show. "She looks like she got off the wrong train," whispered one. "The wrong train, at the wrong station, in the wrong century," added the other. Rachel pretended not to hear. She was already used to those judgmental looks. That was when a 6-year-old whirlwind burst through the door. "Rachel! Rachel! Rachel!" Noah shouted as if announcing a superhero. He threw himself into her arms with such force that the remaining books flew straight into the water. Jack and the Beanstalk sank along with the goldfish. "First victim of the day, drowned children's literature," Rachel sighed. "The fish will learn to read underwater." Noah laughed. She laughed too. At least someone was enjoying it. The laughter stopped when the air grew heavier. Damian Prescott appeared in the doorway as if he had just stepped out of a magazine. A flawless navy suit, dark hair in place, steel-gray eyes that calculated the value of everything. He looked her up and down. Rachel felt like a used car being inspected. "Tonight you're going to accompany me to the gala dinner." It was not an invitation. It was an order. "Excuse me?" She blinked. "You heard me. If I had time, I would refuse with more class. I am not asking, I am deciding." The whole garden seemed to hold its breath. The housekeepers exchanged glances like jurors in a courtroom. Rachel crossed her arms. "Sorry, but my contract says nanny, not emergency date. Your contract says you work for me, and I need you at my side tonight." Noah stepped in, smiling. "Dad, if she goes, I'm wearing a suit too." Rachel laughed. Damian almost smiled. "Almost. You're not, champ. This is for adults." "Then it's not fun," Noah replied, making Rachel laugh again. She lifted her chin. "I own 2 dresses, one for funerals, the other for doing laundry. Choose whichever one embarrasses you less." Damian blinked, surprised by her boldness. "I don't care about the fabric. I care about who is beside me." Rachel felt a knot in her chest, curiosity mixed with irritation. "Why me?" He hesitated for half a second. "Because you are real." And he walked into the house without waiting for an answer. "The driver will pick you up at 7. Wear something that won't make me regret this decision." Rachel stood in the garden, barefoot, with wet books in the fountain, and Noah looking at her as if she were the star of a movie. "He likes you," the boy whispered. "He has a very strange way of showing it," Rachel replied. A few hours later, Rachel was facing the mirror in her small apartment. The red dress, borrowed from her neighbor Mrs. Patterson, clung to her hips and revealed her back with an unexpected neckline. The fabric was still in perfect condition, even after being kept for 10 years as a silent reminder. Rachel took a deep breath. "Okay, Chicago. Laugh at me if you want. But I'll survive this." Mrs. Patterson appeared at the door, holding the hem of the dress as if it were a relic. "This dress has already survived 2 decades, 3 building renovations, and my divorce. It's in better shape than I am." She laughed and winked. "Wear it well, dear. The world isn't ready for you, or for that neckline." Rachel laughed nervously, adjusting the fabric on her back. "I hope the world is looking at the shoes." "Nonsense." Mrs. Patterson lifted her chin. "That red was made to bother, and nothing bothers high society more than a real woman in a real dress." The horn sounded outside. The driver had arrived. Rachel grabbed her small purse, said goodbye to her neighbor, and walked to the door. When her fingers touched the doorknob, a chill ran down her spine, as if destiny was waiting on the other side. The black car slid through the streets of Chicago while she looked out the window. The lights reflected on the glass like fallen stars, and Rachel had no idea she was on her way to the biggest social scandal the city had seen in years. At that exact moment, 3 things were happening at once. Mrs. Patterson was dialing the first friend on her gossip list. Damien was adjusting his tie in the mirror, wondering why he had made that decision, and Chicago's paparazzi were receiving an anonymous tip about the surprise date of the city's most sought-after CEO. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the red fabric against her skin. She had no idea that in 2 hours, that forgotten dress from the back of her closet would be splashed across the front page of every newspaper in Chicago, along with the question no one could answer. Who is the mysterious woman who captured Damien Prescott's icy heart? The night was just beginning. Some dresses are made to impress, others to survive. Rachel's was about to be tested on both counts. The Chicago Cultural Center glowed like a giant jewel in the night. Stained glass windows cast rainbows across polished marble, crystal chandeliers hung like captured stars, and the hum of high society echoed between the majestic columns. Rachel drew another breath as the car stopped at the entrance. Through the window, she could see the photographer's flashes exploding like fireworks. "Ready for the circus?" Damien asked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Born ready?" Rachel lied with a forced smile. "I just can't promise I'll come out alive." The driver opened the door. Damien stepped out first and offered his hand. For a moment, Rachel hesitated, but the red fabric against her skin seemed to whisper courage. She took his hand and stepped out of the car. The flashes exploded instantly. Rachel blinked, momentarily blinded, but kept her chin up. The dress clung to her hips like a second skin, too tight but perfectly dramatic. "Smile," Damien murmured in her ear. "They're recording history." "What kind of history?" She whispered back. "Comedy or tragedy? That depends on how you perform." They walked arm in arm up the grand staircase. Rachel tried to ignore the pinch of her shoe and the sense that every eye in the hall was calculating the price of each piece of her outfit. Then a sharp voice cut through the elegant murmur. "A nanny in evening wear? That's new." HarperCollins appeared like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. A black gown worth more than Rachel's yearly rent, jewelry that sparkled like tiny suns, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. The comment was loud enough for nearby journalists to hear. Rachel felt her cheeks burn. Damien stiffened at her side. His voice was low but firm. "She's my guest, and she deserves to be here more than you do." The silence that followed was deafening. Cameras clicked wildly, capturing every flicker of shock on the faces around them. Harper blinked as if she had just been slapped. Rachel decided to break the tension before it turned into a staring duel. "If I trip," she whispered to Damien, just loud enough to sound confident, "at least I'll make headlines." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Classical music began to play, violins filling the hall with dramatic notes. "Care to dance?" Damien asked, as if challenging the entire world. Rachel glanced at the dance floor. Elegant couples glided like swans across a crystal lake. "Careful, Prescott," she said, taking his hand. "It's already dangerous enough." They walked to the center of the floor. Rachel felt as if she were entering a gladiator's arena, only with more crystals and fewer swords. Damien pulled her close. His hand at her waist was firm, almost possessive. Rachel placed her hand on his shoulder and tried to remember the basic steps of a waltz. "Relax," he murmured. "Just follow my lead." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one wearing a 10-year-old dress." They began to dance. On the third step, Rachel discreetly stepped on his foot. "If I step on you again," she whispered with a playful tone, "I swear I'll sell the story to TMZ." "Go ahead," Damien replied with a half-smile. "They pay less than I spend on wine." It was on the fifth turn that it happened. The red fabric, pulled too tightly across her hips, gave way with a faint tear. Rachel felt the cool air against her skin and knew instantly the dress had ripped. Her eyes went wide. In panic, she tried to glance over her shoulder. "Don't move," Damien ordered softly. Before anyone else could notice, he slid his hand from her waist to her hip, covering the exact spot where the fabric had torn. To the audience, it looked like a calculated gesture of intimacy. "Keep dancing," he whispered in her ear. "No one needs to know." Rachel felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. His hand was warm against her skin, firm and protective. "Easy for you," she murmured, trying to keep a smile. "It's not your neck on the line. Feels like we're in the final scene of Dirty Dancing. Trust me." And strangely, she did. They kept dancing as if nothing had happened. To everyone watching, Damien Prescott was holding his companion with a tenderness no one had ever seen in him. Across the ballroom, Harper Collins squeezed her champagne glass so tightly the crystal nearly cracked. What was supposed to be a public humiliation had turned into a romantic moment that would make headlines the next day. The music ended. Damien released Rachel slowly, but kept his hand strategically in place until she could discreetly adjust the fabric. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." For a moment, they stared at each other. There was something different in the air between them, something that hadn't been there when the evening began. That's when Rachel noticed a blonde woman approaching with a smile that promised trouble. "Meredith Walsh, Chicago Tribune," the woman introduced herself, recorder in hand. What a beautiful moment. Readers will love to know more about Mr. Prescott's mysterious companion. Rachel felt her stomach sink. "No interviews today," Damien said firmly, but Meredith was already whispering something to the photographer beside her. Rachel caught only the last words. "Tonight, the city will meet the real Rachel. We'll expose her." The music started again, but Rachel could hardly hear it over the pounding in her ears. The game had changed. And she wasn't sure she was ready for the rules. Some proposals change your life, others destroy your sanity. The one Damien was about to make promised both. The next morning came with headlines Rachel wished she could forget. "Mysterious companion wins over CEO. Who is the woman who melted the Ice King's heart? Romance or strategy?" Each title was more dramatic than the last. Rachel had just dropped Noah off at school and was still trying to convince herself she could pretend none of it existed. That's when her phone buzzed in her hand. On the screen, Damien Prescott. She sighed deeply before answering. "Hello?" Damien's voice came sharp, leaving no room for courtesy. "My office. Now." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Good morning to you too, sunshine." "Rachel, I'm on my way." Across the street, the family driver was already waiting with the car door open. She hung up inside. She had spent the night sewing the tear in her red dress, and her back ached as if she had boxed with a sewing machine. 20 minutes later, she was on the 40th floor of Prescott Enterprises. The conference room looked like a giant aquarium. Glass walls everywhere, panoramic view of Chicago, and a table worth more than her car. Damien was standing by the window. Charcoal gray suit, rigid posture, like a general planning a war. "Sit," he said without turning. "Such impeccable manners. Did they refund your charm lessons?" He turned. Something in his face was different. Tension mixed with determination. "I need you to be my girlfriend." Rachel blinked twice. "Sorry, I thought you called me in for a firing, not a romantic comedy. I'm serious." She dropped into the leather chair, laughing nervously. "Of course you are, and I'm the next Miss America." Damien stepped closer, resting his hands on the table. "The board is questioning my stability. The press is making up stories. I need a respectable girlfriend to calm things down." "Respectable?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Did you see today's headlines? They're calling me everything but respectable." "That's exactly why. You're real, authentic, the opposite of everything they expect from me." Rachel crossed her arms. "Let me get this straight. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend to fool the press and the board?" "Exactly. And what do I get out of it?" Damien hesitated for half a second. "Do you want to save your career or your dignity?" "Wow, how generous. Can I choose which one you'll destroy first?" The door opened and Elliot, Damien's assistant, came in carrying a tray with coffee. He stopped when he noticed the tension in the air. "Sorry, he began. "Stay," Damien ordered. "You can serve as a witness." Rachel stood and walked to the window. "I've signed worse contracts," she murmured, looking down at the city. "Like with my cell phone provider." Elliot nearly choked on the coffee. "So is that a yes?" Damien asked. Rachel turned to face him. "I don't need love. I need silence in the press." She mimicked his voice perfectly. "That's the deal." "Then you picked the wrong babysitter. I don't know how to stay quiet." Damien stepped forward. "I'm not asking you to stay quiet. I'm asking you to be yourself." "Dangerous. Very dangerous." "Why?" Rachel smiled, but there was something sharp in that smile. "Because when I'm myself, things explode, literally. Ask the neighbor about the microwave incident." Elliot cleared his throat discreetly. "Do you want me to prepare some kind of document?" Rachel clapped her hands. "Great idea. I want specific clauses. Unlimited pizza on Fridays, the right to wear pajamas at family meetings, and a $1,000 fine every time you call me dear in public." Damien looked at her as if she were an impossible puzzle. Are you serious about the pizza? Completely. And I want a good brand, nothing frozen. Elliot scribbled furiously as if this were a corporate merger negotiation. Anything else? Damien asked. Rachel stepped closer, stopping just a few inches from him. Just one. When this ends, and it will end, I walk out the front door. No scandals, no public humiliation, no HarperCollins celebrating my downfall. Deal. They locked eyes. Rachel could smell his cologne, woody and annoyingly attractive. For a second, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked softly. Because when I take on a challenge, I really mean it. You'll regret it when I start being myself, she added. Damien extended his hand. Take the risk. But know that to convince the board and the press, you'll need to move into the mansion. Appearances are everything in this game. Rachel looked at his hand, then at Elliot, who was writing it all down like a medieval scribe, then at the Chicago skyline, shining like a dangerous promise. She shook Damien's hand. Okay, Mr. Prescott, she said, walking toward the door. Get ready for the reality show that just started. The door slammed behind her with an echo that promised chaos. Elliot looked at Damien, who was still standing in the same spot. Sir? He whispered. What exactly did we just do? Damien kept his eyes on the door, a half-smile playing on his lips. Elliot, he said slowly, I think we just signed our own death sentence. Outside, Rachel pressed the elevator button, her heart pounding like a war drum. In a few hours, she would be packing her bags to officially enter Damien Prescott's world. She didn't know that, at that exact moment, HarperCollins was 3 floors below, leaving a secret meeting with 2 board members. The game had officially begun. Some people are born to shine. Others accidentally discover they have hidden superpowers. Rachel was about to make the most dangerous discovery of her life. Saturday arrived, with Noah knocking on her bedroom door at 7 in the morning. Hair messy, Spider-Man pajamas, and a scribbled list in hand. We need to buy gifts for Grandma Helena's birthday, he announced, as if it were a state mission. Rachel rubbed her eyes. Noah, it's 7 in the morning. Even the birds aren't awake yet. Birds are lazy. Come on, Rachel. Dad said you're my official shopping partner. She sighed, but smiled. In the past 3 days since the agreement with Damien, Noah had become her faithful shadow, as if he feared she might disappear. Okay, champ. But first, coffee, lots of coffee. An hour later, they were walking through the streets of River North. Noah held her hand, chattering about perfect gifts for grandmothers who like fancy things, but not too fancy. Rachel laughed at his childlike logic. It was comforting to feel useful in a simple way, far from media spotlights and the complications of fake contracts. There. Noah pointed to a coffee shop that looked like it belonged in an indie film. Been there, done that was painted in artistic letters on the window. Great choice. Let's have some coffee and plan our gift strategy. They stepped into the cozy place. Soft acoustic music played. The smell of ground coffee filled the air, and college students typed furiously on laptops. Rachel instantly felt at home. Can I have a... She looked up at the sophisticated menu on the wall. A lavender honey oat milk macchiato? The barista smiled patiently. Of course. Actually, Rachel laughed. Just give me 3 shots of liquid survival. The fancy name is just decoration. Noah tugged at her sleeve. Rachel, is latte a dog's last name? No, little one. It's coffee with milk that costs as much as a full meal. That's when she heard familiar voices coming from the corner table. 3 men in suits were arguing over spreadsheets. Dad's investors, Noah whispered, recognizing them. Rachel gave a polite wave. They returned the gesture with courteous smiles, but she noticed the assessing looks. The same kind of scrutiny she had faced at the gala. While waiting for her coffee, Rachel tried to open the sugar packet. The paper tore badly, and half the contents spilled across the counter. Perfect, she muttered, trying to clean up the mess. The investors chuckled quietly. Not out of malice, but with that condescending tone that made Rachel feel like an animal on display. So, Rachel, one of them called out, Marcus, if she remembered correctly, how are you adjusting to the business world? She turned, still holding the sugar-stained napkin. Well, considering my previous experience was getting a 6-year-old to eat broccoli, I'd say I'm surviving. And what does a nanny know about business? Marcus pressed, clearly amused. Rachel felt irritation rise. Not anger, just the exhaustion of always having to prove she wasn't invisible. Numbers don't change reality, she said without much thought. People do. You can have the best projections in the world, but if you don't understand that behind every investment there's someone afraid of losing money, you will fail. Silence fell over the table like a heavy curtain. What do you mean? Another investor asked, now genuinely interested. Rachel took a deep breath. She had started, so she might as well finish. You focus on data. I take care of a child who's afraid of the dark. He doesn't need statistics about nighttime safety. He needs someone who understands fear and finds a solution that makes sense to him. Business is the same. It's about trust, not numbers. Marcus leaned forward. Go on. If you want someone to invest in Damien's company, don't show them spreadsheets. Show them you understand what keeps those people awake at night. Show them their money will solve real problems, not just create nice figures in reports. The third investor, who hadn't spoken until now, closed his laptop. Numbers don't change reality. People do, he repeated slowly. That is brilliant. Rachel blinked, surprised by her own boldness. I didn't mean for it to sound like business consulting. Sorry. At that moment, the cafe door opened and Damien walked in. He scanned the room, spotted Noah first, then Rachel. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since they had met, he smiled. Not a polite half-smile, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He walked up to the investors' table. Marcus, James, Stephen, I hope you're not bothering my consultant. Your consultant? Marcus laughed. Damien, she just gave the best investor behavior analysis I've ever heard. She has more power than she realizes. Damien murmured, but Rachel caught it. Noah jumped into the conversation, proud. She knows more than you guys, suit-wearing uncles. Everyone laughed, but Rachel noticed something in Damien's eyes. Surprise mixed with pride? Across the street, Harper Collins slammed her laptop shut, nearly breaking the screen. She had been watching the entire scene through the cafe window. Meredith, seated next to her, raised an eyebrow. Problems? Harper drew a deep breath, but her smile was sharp as a blade. If they want a show, she said slowly, I'll give them one. Rachel couldn't see Harper across the street. She was too busy trying to understand why Damien kept looking at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, and why that made her heart race in a way fake contracts shouldn't allow. The coffee arrived, but Rachel barely noticed. She had the distinct feeling something had shifted in those last few minutes. She just didn't know if it was for better or worse. Some nights are meant for celebrating, others for surviving. Rachel was about to find out which kind this would be. Alinea, Chicago glowed like a hidden jewel in the heart of River North. Mirrored walls endlessly reflected the precisely aligned tables, each utensil placed as if it were a surgical instrument. The kind of place where even the air seemed expensive. Rachel adjusted the navy dress for the 10th time as she walked beside Damien. It had been borrowed from the stylist he had hired. For social emergencies, as she had joked. Breathe, Damien murmured in her ear. It's just dinner. Dinner that costs more than my rent, she whispered back. And with an audience that hates me. The maitre d' approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He scanned Rachel from head to toe as if scanning a suspicious barcode. Mr. Prescott, your usual table, he said, completely ignoring Rachel. And the high chair for my son? Damien asked. Of course. What a charming exception. Noah came running down the hallway, his little bow tie crooked and his wide smile showing he had no idea about social tensions. Rachel, you look beautiful. Like a princess. She laughed genuinely for the first time that night. Thank you, little one. You look handsome too. They were guided through the main hall. Rachel felt the stairs sticking to her like labels. Conversations stopped as they walked by, then restarted in whispers as they passed. At the corner table, Harper Collins presided like a dark queen. Blood-red dress, jewelry that caught the light like tiny lightning bolts, and a smile that promised destruction. How interesting, she said, her voice deliberately loud. The nanny leading trends now. The restrained giggles echoed around the investors' table. Rachel felt the blood rush to her face, but she kept her chin up. Harper, Damien greeted her dryly. Damien, dear, and your company. Rachel sat down, picked up the menu, and almost choked. May I have regular water? She asked the waiter. Without complicated names like Himalayan rain filtered? Noah whispered much too loudly, Do they have a kids' menu for dignity? Some people laughed nervously. Rachel seized the moment of lightness, but she knew it was only the warm-up. Harper stood and walked to their table with the grace of a predator. "May I?" she asked, already sitting down without waiting for an answer. She pulled out her phone, showing the screen discreetly to the investors at the next table. "Did you all see this charming article?" she said, loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. Marcus, one of the cafe's investors, leaned over to read. His expression changed. "Nanny becomes CEO's lightning-fast girlfriend," he read aloud, not realizing he was being used. Silence fell over the nearby tables like a heavy curtain. Rachel felt as though all the oxygen had been drained from the room. "Harper, that's enough," Damien said, his voice low but tense. "Oh, but I've only just started," she replied with poisonous sweetness. At that moment, the waitress arrived with a bottle of red wine. As she passed Rachel, she stumbled slightly, letting a few drops splash dangerously close to the dress. "Sorry," the waitress exclaimed, but Rachel noticed the quick glance she exchanged with Harper. Meredith, seated 2 tables away, smiled like a cat that had just caught a mouse. "Impressive coordination," Rachel said quietly. "You must have practiced." Harper leaned forward, her smile sharp. "Dear, etiquette is knowing your place." Something broke inside Rachel. Maybe it was the exhaustion of 3 days pretending to be someone she wasn't. Maybe it was seeing Noah witness all of it. Or maybe it was simply enough. She rose slowly, her chair scraping against the marble. "Looking for a show?" she said, her clear voice cutting through the restaurant's murmur. Here it is, the whole circus staring at the nanny. The silence was now absolute. Even the waiters stopped moving. "Elegance is not etiquette," Rachel continued, looking directly at Harper. "It's character, and that cannot be rented." She picked up her purse, adjusted the hem of her dress so she wouldn't trip, and started walking toward the exit. "Rachel," Damien called, standing up. "No," she answered without turning around. "You wanted a pretend girlfriend? Lesson number 1. Facades break when the wind gets too strong." Noah jumped from his chair. "I'm going with her." "No, little one. Stay with your father. He will need you." The revolving door of the restaurant echoed as she went through it. The cold Chicago air hit her like a slap, but it was comforting after the suffocating atmosphere inside. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in her hands. She had just humiliated herself in front of Chicago's elite, but strangely, she felt lighter. That was when the flash went off. A paparazzi appeared out of nowhere, camera aimed directly at her. Rachel blinked, momentarily blinded, her tear-filled eyes shining under the artificial light. "Smile, darling," the photographer shouted. "Chicago wants to know how it feels to be a rejected Cinderella." The flash went off again, freezing the image of Rachel on the sidewalk. Borrowed dress, tears held back, but her head lifted in defiance. She did not know that photo would go viral in less than an hour. And that across the city, 3 different journalists were already typing headlines that would change everything. The brave nanny who defied the elite. Rachel Morgan, the woman who taught Chicago about dignity, when truth wins over etiquette. The war had officially begun, and for the first time, Rachel was not running. Some conversations happen in safe places. The most important ones happen when you have nowhere left to run. Rachel walked through the streets of Chicago as if every step were a declaration of war. The navy blue dress swayed in the cold wind, but she didn't feel the temperature. The humiliation still burned like an open wound. "Rachel," Damien's voice cut through the noise of traffic. She didn't turn. She kept walking toward the financial district, where glass towers rose against the night sky like giants. "Rachel, stop," he said, catching up with long strides. "Stop what?" She answered without slowing down. "Stop so you can explain to me how that was a business strategy?" It wasn't strategy. It was cowardice. The blunt honesty of the reply made her stop. She turned, expecting the usual controlled Damien. Instead, she saw a man with a wrinkled suit and something that looked almost like despair in his eyes. "I need to explain," he said. "But not here. Not with half of Chicago watching." Rachel looked around. People were already stopping on the sidewalks, phones pointed as if waiting for another show. "So where?" Damien pointed to a nearby office building. "There. My lawyer's office is on the 15th floor. We can talk without turning this into a headline." 10 minutes later, they were in the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected two people who looked like strangers, even to themselves. She still trembling with contained anger, he showing a vulnerability he never displayed in public. "There isn't a button for first honest conversation, is there?" Rachel said, trying to break the tension while looking at the panel. Damien pressed 15. For a second, he almost smiled. "If there were, I would have used it a long time ago." The elevator rose smoothly until the 8th floor, when it suddenly jolted hard and stopped. The lights flickered, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. "Seriously?" Rachel looked up at the ceiling as if negotiating with the universe. "Even technology wants us to work this out." Damien pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. "At least we're only 8 floors off the ground," he murmured. "Optimism? From you? The world really must be ending." They stood on opposite sides of the elevator, like two boxers measuring distance before a fight. "You didn't protect me," Rachel said, breaking the silence. Damien leaned his head back against the mirrored wall. "I've never protected anyone in my life. I control situations, manipulate outcomes, negotiate exits. But protect? That takes something I don't have." "What?" "The courage to lose." The answer caught her off guard. There was a raw honesty in it she hadn't expected. "I know how to handle Wall Street sharks," he continued. "With you, I forget everything I know about control." Rachel felt her anger give way to something more complicated. "If I don't laugh, I cry," she said quietly. "Today I only laughed so I wouldn't give you that power over me." Damien's phone vibrated. An audio message from Noah echoed in the confined space. "Dad, press the sorry button. Rachel is sad, and I don't like it when she's sad." The laugh that escaped Rachel was half tear, half relief. "At least someone in your family has emotional intelligence." Damien looked at the phone, then at her. "He's right. About everything." "Damien, I'm afraid," he said suddenly, the words sounding like a confession dragged out of him. "Of what?" "Of losing the company to gossip. Of Noah growing up thinking his father is a coward. Of you realizing I am exactly the kind of man you should stay away from." The vulnerability in his voice was almost tangible. Rachel felt as if she were seeing Damien Prescott for the first time. Not the flawless CEO, but the man scared beneath the armor. "It's cold in here," he said, noticing she was trembling. It wasn't true. The elevator was warm. But when Damien took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders, Rachel didn't protest. His fingers brushed the skin of her neck, and she felt a shiver run down her spine like electricity. "Thank you," she whispered. They were close now. Too close. Rachel could see the fine lines around his eyes, feel the heat of his body through the fabric of the jacket. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough. "Damien," she answered, almost breathless. He raised his hand, gently touching her face. His thumb traced a delicate line across her cheek, as if memorizing every detail. Rachel leaned into the touch, her eyes closing for a moment. When she opened them again, she found Damien looking at her as if she were something both precious and terrifying. He leaned in. She didn't pull away. The world shrank to the space between them, to their shared breath, to a moment suspended in time. His lips were just millimeters from hers when a mechanical crash echoed through the elevator. The lights flickered violently, and the cabin jolted upward. They pulled apart as if waking from a dream. An automated voice announced, "Elevator service restored. We apologize for the inconvenience." The cabin moved smoothly again until it reached the 8th floor. The doors opened with a cheerful ding that sounded like cruel irony. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to return to reality. She slipped the jacket off her shoulders and handed it back to Damien, avoiding his eyes. "Thank you for the conversation," she said. "Rachel, wait." She shook her head, already stepping out. "Good night, Damien." Rachel walked silently down the hallway to the next elevator. She got in, pressed the button for the lobby, and went down alone. In the lobby, her heels echoed across the polished marble as she headed for the exit. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes still on her, even 15 floors away. Damien stood there, watching the doors close slowly. When they sealed shut, he pressed the button for the 15th floor and went up in silence. In the empty lawyer's office, he stood at the window, watching Rachel cross the street below. He pulled out his phone and hesitated for a long moment before dialing. "Elliot? It's me. I need you to prepare something for me tomorrow morning." "Of course, sir. What exactly?" Damien watched Rachel disappear around the corner, an expression of determination and fear mixed on his face. A statement to the press, it's time to stop being a coward. He hung up without further explanation but kept staring out the window, as if he could still see her ghost on the empty streets. Down below, Rachel walked home, still feeling the heat of his fingers on her skin. She didn't know that, 15 floors above, Damien was making the most dangerous decision of his life, a decision that would change everything. Some wars begin with bombs, others with headlines. HarperCollins was about to prove that words can be more destructive than explosives. The next morning, Damien's office looked like a crisis command center. 6 screens lined the walls, displaying headlines that pulsed like open wounds. Babysitter in charge of CEO, relationship to save the board, Rachel Morgan, calculating, or victim. Elliot was rushing from phone to phone like a firefighter trying to put out simultaneous blazes. Chicago Tribune on line 2, Wall Street Journal on 3, he shouted over the noise. And the Post wants comments about the photos of you two leaving the building last night. Damien stood in front of the window, watching the city wake up, unaware it was witnessing the biggest corporate scandal of the year. How many calls? He asked without turning. 47, since 6 this morning. And Rachel? Still asleep, at least I think so. Her curtains are closed. Damien finally turned. Dark circles hung under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept. If reputation were stock, Elliot muttered, trying to break the tension, today would close at a record low. Buy low, it goes up, a female voice answered from the door. Rachel walked into the office wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, but with that defiant spark in her eyes, Damien was learning to fear and admire at the same time. I see the party started without me, she said, glancing at the headlines. Rachel, you shouldn't be here, Damien began. Why not? Because I'm being crucified by the press, or because this might hurt your business? Before he could respond, the door opened again. HarperCollins entered like a queen surveying conquered land. Impeccable black dress, a little smile that promised destruction. Damien, darling, she said, ignoring Rachel completely. I came as soon as I heard. This is out of control. Rachel folded her arms. This has a name, and she's standing right here. Harper finally looked at her, as if just noticing a piece of furniture. Rachel, it's nothing personal, just business. Bunny, to me it feels very personal. Damien stepped between them, but his eyes were fixed on Harper. You manipulate headlines, he said, his voice sharp. Harper laughed, a sound both crystalline and poisonous. Darling, headlines only amplify the truth. I don't invent reality, I just guide it. And what truth are you guiding? That your rental girlfriend is destroying 15 years of corporate building. Rachel stepped forward. Rental girlfriend? Creative. Write that down, Elliot. It could make a good book title. Rachel, Damien warned. No, let her speak. Harper smiled. I want to hear how she'll explain to the board that she isn't an opportunist. Elliot's phone rang again. He answered, whispered a few words, and hung up, pale. Sir, the board wants a meeting. Today, 2 o'clock. Silence fell over the room like a death sentence. Harper turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Damien, you can manipulate headlines, but you can't erase applause, and the audience has already chosen their side. When she left, Rachel dropped into the leather chair. So, what's the battle plan? Damien didn't answer right away. He was staring out the window again, but now Rachel could see the tension in every line of his body. Damien, he turned, and there was something in his eyes that made her stomach sink. You're fired. The words fell like lead. Excuse me? Temporarily, he said quickly. Until this blows over. Rachel stood slowly, as if moving underwater. You're pushing me away to save your image. I'm protecting you. Protecting me from what? The truth? The fact that maybe, just maybe, you're not the suit-wearing robot everyone thinks you are? Rachel, thanks for the promotion, she said sharply. From scandal to scapegoat. Quite the evolution. She walked to the door but stopped before leaving. When you decide whether you want to be brave or a coward, let me know. But don't call me back just because the board approved. The door slammed behind her with an echo that sounded final. Elliot looked at Damien, who was back at the window. Sir? Do you want me to prepare the termination papers? Damien said quietly. Just let her go. Rachel left the building without looking back. The family car was already waiting at the curb, and she let the driver take her silently through the streets of Chicago. Sometime later, at the Prescott mansion, in the hallway, Rachel was walking toward her room when she found Noah coming out of the game room. He saw her and ran to her. "Rachel, want to play Lego?" She knelt down to his level, trying to smile. "Not today, little one. I have to pack a few things." "You're leaving?" The innocent question hit her like a punch in the stomach. "For a while." "But you'll come back, right?" Rachel kissed his forehead. "One day, when things are different." 20 minutes later, she was in the hallway with a small box of belongings. Noah watched from the staircase, eyes filled with tears, not understanding why adults always made things so complicated. "You'll come back," he said, more a statement than a question. "Take care of your dad for me," she answered. From his office, Damien watched through the glass as Rachel stepped into the elevator. When the doors closed, it felt as if a part of him had been ripped away. 3 floors below, Harper Collins smiled as she typed on her phone. The words appeared on the screen. Phase 1 complete. Start of Phase 2. R temporarily eliminated. D vulnerable. Proceed as planned. She pressed send. The message vanished from the screen, but the recipient remained a mystery. Harper put away the phone, glanced one last time at the Prescott Enterprises building through the cafe window, and smiled. The game was only beginning. Some goodbyes happened with tears. Others with the silent promise that one day everything will make sense. Rachel's apartment felt smaller than she remembered. Maybe it was because she had gotten used to the high ceilings and endless hallways of the Prescott mansion, or maybe it was because her entire life was being packed into 3 cardboard boxes. The light rain tapped against the window like impatient fingers, and Chicago's cold winter light made everything look like a black and white film. Rachel carefully folded the navy blue dress, the one from the disastrous dinner, and placed it in the first box. "There," she murmured to herself. "My life fits into 3 labels and half a roll of tape." She wrote beginnings on the first box with a pen that barely worked. The irony wasn't lost on her. The phone had rung 12 times in the past 2 hours. Reporters, curious acquaintances, even Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor, wanting to know if it was true she had won and lost the heart of a millionaire in 1 week. Rachel didn't answer. There was nothing she could explain that would make sense. Then came a knock at the door. 3 quick knocks, a pause, 2 more. The code Noah had invented so she would know it was him. She opened the door and found the 6-year-old standing in the hallway, eyes red from crying, holding Elliot's hand. "You left without saying goodbye," Noah said, his small voice full of accusation. Rachel knelt down to face him. "I'm sorry, little one. I was trying to gather courage." "For what?" "To say goodbye the right way." Elliot stepped closer, clearly uncomfortable. "He insisted on coming. Said you promised you'd always say goodbye to him in person." Rachel smiled despite the tears that threatened to fall. "And I always keep my promises." Noah looked around the apartment, noticing the boxes. "You saved Dad," he said suddenly. "You can't leave me now." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. "Noah, listen. Sometimes loving means walking out the wrong door. Then promise you'll come back through the right one." Rachel pulled him into a tight hug. "One day I'll come back, the right way, when your dad learns how to be brave." "He already is brave," Noah protested. "He sits through boring meetings every day." Elliot chuckled softly. "He feels," the assistant said quietly so only Rachel could hear. "He just doesn't know how to say it." Rachel's phone buzzed. An email notification. She glanced at the screen and blinked in surprise. "What is it?" Elliot asked. "A job offer. In Boston. To lead a social education project." It was from Marcus, the investor from the cafe. The message read, "Your analysis about people versus numbers impressed me. I have a proposal that might interest you. Call me." Rachel showed the screen to Elliot, who read it and nodded slowly. "It's a good opportunity," he said. "It's far," she replied. "Sometimes far is exactly what we need." Noah tugged at the hem of her shirt. "Where are you going?" "To a place where I can help children, the way I helped you. But I still need help." Rachel kissed his forehead. "You're stronger than you think. And your dad, he just needs to remember how to be a child again." She took a notepad and wrote a few words. Folding the paper, she handed it to Elliot. "Give this to him. When the dust settles." Elliot tucked the paper into his pocket. What did you write? Something he once told me. Numbers don't change reality. People do. 20 minutes later, Noah hugged her at the door as if it were the last time he would ever see someone he loved. "You're the bravest nanny in the world," he whispered in her ear. "And you're the smartest boy in Chicago." When they left, Rachel closed the door and leaned against it. The apartment was silent, except for the sound of rain and the ticking of the kitchen clock. She picked up the phone and dialed Marcus's number. "Hello? Marcus, this is Rachel Morgan, about your proposal." "Rachel, I'm glad you called. Can you talk now?" "Yes, and I'm interested." Across the city, on the rooftop of Prescott Tower, Damien stood alone, staring at Chicago. The cold wind cut through his suit, but he didn't feel it. In his hands, he held his phone, Rachel's contact glowing on the screen. He had typed and erased 10 different messages. "I'm sorry," deleted. "Come back," deleted. "I was wrong," deleted. Elliot appeared at the rooftop door. "Sir, I have something for you." He handed over the folded paper. Damien opened it and read Rachel's words. For a moment, his face showed no emotion. Then slowly, he slipped the paper into the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. "Elliot," he said without looking away from the city. "Yes, sir?" "Cancel everything tomorrow. I have a war to win." The wind carried his words across the city, but Rachel couldn't hear them. She was already 40,000 feet in the air, flying toward a new life. Below the clouds, Chicago shone as always, but two people who had changed everything for each other were now separated by more than distance. They were separated by the hardest choice either of them had ever made. Some battles are lost for lack of strategy, others from too much cowardice. Damien was about to find out which one his had been. The rooftop of Prescott Tower cut the Chicago sky like a blade of glass and steel. Damien had been there for 2 hours, ever since he learned Rachel's plane had taken off at 7:15 p.m. The night wind pierced through his suit like paper, but he didn't feel the cold. In his hands, Rachel's note was crumpled from being read so many times. Numbers don't change reality, people do. She was right, he murmured to the glowing city. "As always." "Sir?" Elliot's voice came from the rooftop entrance. Damien didn't turn. "Are you going to tell me I need to go down and face reality?" "No," Elliot stepped closer, stopping beside him. "I'm going to tell you that reality is waiting for you to do something about it." "Like what?" "She's gone. It's over." "She didn't leave out of weakness," Elliot said, gazing at the city with him. "She left because you didn't give her a reason to stay." Damien closed his eyes. "I lost my most important war, and it wasn't with Harper, it was with myself. There's still time to win." "How?" "She's 1,000 miles away." "A CEO can delegate business," Elliot said slowly, "but he can't outsource love." The word love hung in the air between them like a confession Damien wasn't yet ready to make. "What good is it to win the world," he whispered, "if I lose the one who taught me how to live? Then stop trying to conquer the world and start fighting for your life." Damien finally turned to face his assistant and best friend. "What do you suggest?" "The Prescott Foundation event is in 3 days. The entire media will be there. The entire board. It's your chance to tell the truth." "What truth?" "That you love her. That she is not a marketing strategy. That Harper manipulated everything." "And what if it's too late?" "And what if it isn't?" At that moment, a small voice came from the door. "Dad?" Noah appeared in his Spider-Man pajamas, messy hair, holding a walkie-talkie as if it were a secret weapon. "Noah, what are you doing awake?" "I couldn't sleep. Did Rachel really leave?" Damien knelt down to his son's level. "She did, champ." "Because of you?" The direct, filterless question of a child hit Damien like a punch in the stomach. "Because of me." Noah crossed his arms. "Then you have to go get her." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. You tell the truth on television, she sees it and she comes back. I'll bet my school lunch." Elliot chuckled softly. "Sometimes a child's logic is more efficient than business strategy." Noah lifted the walkie-talkie. "If you don't speak in public, I'll go on stage myself and expose Dad on the internet." "Expose what?" "That you cry when you watch Pixar movies. That you keep all the letters I write. That you look at Rachel's pictures on your phone when you think I'm not watching." Damien blinked. "You saw that?" "Dad, I'm 6 years old, not blind." Elliot coughed to hide his laughter. "So?" Noah continued. "Are you going to be brave, or do I have to teach you?" Damien looked at his son, then at Elliot, then at the city stretching endlessly below them. "It's decided," he said slowly. "You'll be my hero, even in a suit." Noah clapped his hands. "I knew it. Rachel always said you had courage stored somewhere." "She said that?" "She said you just needed to remember where you put it." Damien stood up, picked Noah up, and looked at Elliot. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning, and I want you to contact every journalist who covered the story. Every single one." "What are you going to say?" "The truth. All of it." Noah pressed his father's face between his little hands. "And after that?" "After that, I'll do something I should have done a long time ago." "What?" Damien walked to the edge of the rooftop, holding Noah safely, and looked toward the horizon where he knew Rachel was building a new life without him. "I'm going to fight for what matters." Elliot stepped closer. "And Harper?" "Harper manipulated headlines, but she cannot manipulate sincere applause." "The board?" "The board will understand that some decisions are not about profit, they are about character." Noah rested his head on his father's shoulder. "Will she come back?" Damien kissed his son's forehead. "We'll find out." He clenched his fists, breathed in the cold Chicago air, and looked at the horizon where the city lights met the darkness of the night. "Chicago will know who Rachel Morgan is," he whispered, "and it will know I was the biggest fool in history for letting her go." The wind carried his words across the city, but this time, they carried something that hadn't been there before. Hope. And the silent promise that in 72 hours, he would make the most important declaration of his life. Not to save the company, not to impress the board, but to win back the only person who had taught his heart to beat again. Some truths whisper, others explode like bombs at the exact moment the world needs to hear them. The auditorium of the Chicago Cultural Center had been transformed into a modern gladiator arena. Colored stained glass cast rainbows over polished marble, but the atmosphere was tense as a razor's edge. 200 people from Chicago's elite filled golden chairs. Journalists pointed cameras like machine guns, and on stage, the giant screen displayed the Prescott Foundation logo. Backstage, Damien adjusted his tie for the 5th time. Dark blue suit, perfect hair, but his hands trembled imperceptibly. 2,000 people watching live, 5 million by streaming, Elliot whispered in his ear. "No pressure." "Where's Noah?" "First row," with a smile that could be seen from space. In the audience, Harper Collins presided like a dark queen in the middle of the 3rd row. Blood-red dress, a pearl necklace worth more than a car, and a smile that promised total destruction. Beside her, Meredith typed on her laptop, preparing headlines that would destroy Damien in real time. "All set?" Harper asked softly. 5 compromising videos of Rachel, 10 fabricated headlines, and 3 witnesses ready to talk about inappropriate behavior, Meredith replied. "He won't survive the next 20 minutes." At the back of the auditorium, almost hidden behind a column, a familiar figure adjusted her scarf and pulled her cap lower. Rachel had returned to Chicago that morning after watching Damien's press conference online. She couldn't stay in Boston, knowing he was about to destroy himself publicly. The host walked onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of Prescott Enterprises and founder of the Prescott Foundation, Damien Prescott." Polite applause echoed through the hall. Damien walked up to the microphone, but instead of starting with his prepared speech, he stopped and looked straight at the cameras. "You deserve the truth," he said, his voice cutting through the audience's murmur like a blade. Harper straightened in her seat. "This wasn't in the script. You know my company," Damien continued. "Today I want you to know my courage." He paused, took a deep breath, and went on. 3 weeks ago, a woman came into my life and changed everything. She isn't a marketing strategy. She isn't a publicity stunt. She is simply the bravest person I've ever met. Shocked whisper spread through the crowd. Journalists scribbled furiously. "She is not a nanny," Damien said, looking directly at Harper. "She is the heart this foundation always needed." Harper stood, furious. "You'll regret this," she shouted. "The only thing I regret," Damien replied calmly, "is taking so long to say this in public." At the back of the hall, Rachel's heart raced. She tried to hide further behind the column, but it was too late. "Rachel Morgan," Damien called, his voice echoing through the auditorium. "I know you're here. Come up." Every head turned. Cameras swiveled like radars locking onto a target. Rachel closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and started down the central aisle. Being invisible never really appealed to me, she murmured to herself. Noah jumped from his front row seat. Go, Rachel, it's your movie scene. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Rachel climbed the stage steps, still hardly believing she was doing this. Damien held out his hand. When their fingers touched, it was as if an electric current shot through the entire room. Why did you come back? He whispered. Because someone taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're afraid. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Harper, in the audience, looked pale as a ghost. Rachel Morgan, Damien said into the microphone, changed my life, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to change hers too. At that moment, Noah ran onto the stage, holding a small blue box. Dad, you forgot this. The audience burst into laughter and applause. Rachel's eyes widened. Noah, what is that? The most important part of the plan, the boy said, handing the box to his father. Damien looked at the box, then at Rachel, then at the 200 people and 5 million viewers online. This wasn't planned, he whispered to her. Nothing between us was planned, she replied. Noah shouted to the audience. No one steps on her feet when they dance, got it? The entire auditorium roared with laughter. Even a few journalists wiped tears from laughing so hard. Harper stood and stormed out, defeated. Meredith followed, closing her laptop as if it were a useless weapon. Damien held Rachel's hand and turned to the audience. Chicago, he said, I want to introduce you to the woman who taught me that numbers don't change reality. People do. The applause was thunderous. Some investors stood. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. Rachel looked at the audience, then at Noah, then at Damien. So, she said into the microphone, is someone going to ask me officially, or do I have to do it myself? Noah jumped between them. I'll ask. Rachel, will you marry my dad and be my official mom? The hall exploded again. Rachel knelt to Noah's level. Little one, that's the most beautiful proposal I've ever received. So is it a yes? Rachel looked at Damien, who was holding the box as if his life depended on it. That depends, she said with a smile. Is your dad going to do this the right way, or will I have to teach him that too? Damien laughed, knelt on the stage in front of all Chicago, and opened the box. And the whole world held its breath, waiting for the words that would change 3 lives forever. Some questions change everything. Others reveal that everything had already changed a long time ago, and all you needed was the courage to admit it. The silence in the auditorium was so complete, it felt as if you could hear every person's heartbeat in unison. Damien was kneeling on the stage of the Chicago Cultural Center, holding a small blue box as if it contained the future of 3 people. Rachel looked at him, then at the 200 people watching them as if they were characters in a movie, then at the cameras broadcasting the moment to millions of viewers. Seriously? She whispered. You're going to do this here, in front of the whole city of Chicago? You said I had to do it the right way, Damien answered with a nervous smile. I met with flowers, maybe a dinner. Rachel Morgan, he cut in, his voice echoing through the microphone, would you change the rest of my life by saying yes? The ring sparkling inside the box was simple, a solitaire that caught the spotlight and returned it in tiny rainbows. Nothing extravagant, nothing screaming money. It was just perfect. Damien, she began, but her voice failed. Noah ran up to them, carrying a second, smaller box. The wedding bands, he announced to the entire auditorium. I picked them. They have little hearts engraved inside. Rachel laughed, even through the tears threatening to fall. You planned this with a 6-year-old? He was my main consultant, Damien admitted. He said you liked simple things that told stories. And what story does this ring tell? Damien stood up but kept the box open between them. It tells that a man who didn't know how to love learned that sometimes love shows up disguised as a nanny who speaks her mind. Rachel glanced at the audience. Some investors had tears in their eyes. Journalists recorded every second. And in the back of the auditorium, Harper Collins stood alone, an island of bitterness in an ocean of joy. I don't know how to live in your world, Rachel whispered. Then teach me to live in yours. The answer caught her off guard. There was a humility in it she had never seen in him. Are you sure? She asked. Because when I say yes to something, I mean it. Forever. On the good days and the days I burn dinner and argue with the TV. Especially on those days. Noah tugged at her dress. Rachel, are you going to say yes, or do I have to convince you too? She knelt down to his level. What do you think, little one? Should I marry your dad? Of course, Noah replied as if it were the easiest question in the world. You two are kind of silly apart. Together you make sense. The child's logic drew laughter from the entire auditorium. Rachel stood and looked Damien in the eye. I never thought I'd say this, she began. The whole auditorium held its breath. But yes, the explosion of applause was immediate. People jumped from their seats, journalists shouted questions, and camera flashes burst like a storm of light. Damien slipped the ring on her finger with hands that trembled slightly. I hope your engagement contract doesn't come with a penalty, Rachel whispered in his ear. Penalty for what? For kissing me in public. That could count as exhibitionism. Damien laughed. Take the risk. And he kissed her. It was a kiss that made up for all the kisses they hadn't shared. For all the conversations cut short, all the almosts that never were, for all the courage it had taken them so long to find. When they pulled apart, Noah stood between them, arms crossed. Now you'll have to put up with me as the official page boy. Page boy? Rachel asked. He promoted himself, Damien explained. And I want a blue tuxedo, like James Bond's, but my size. The audience erupted in laughter again. At the back of the auditorium, Harper Collins picked up her purse and walked toward the exit. Every step was a defeat. Every camera flash made her more irrelevant. Meredith followed, trying to keep some dignity. Harper, we can still? No, Harper said without turning. It's over. The auditorium doors closed behind her with a sound that felt final. On stage, Damien held Rachel's hand and turned to the audience. Chicago, he said into the microphone, I want to announce that the Prescott Foundation will have a new director. And the future of this foundation will be built on a principle my fiancé taught me. People change reality. The applause started again, but now it carried a different tone. It wasn't just celebration, it was approval. Respect. Rachel stepped closer to the microphone. And I want to announce that I learned something important today, she said. Sometimes love shows up in the most unlikely place, disguised as the most complicated person at the most impossible time. And when it does, the only thing you can do is say yes and hope life is generous with the two of you. Noah jumped between them again. And I want to announce that now I officially have a mom. And she makes the best peanut butter sandwich in the world. The auditorium burst into laughter one last time. When the lights went out and the cameras stopped filming, 3 people remained on stage. A CEO who had learned how to love, a babysitter who had become a queen, and a 6-year-old boy who always knew they were perfect for each other. And somewhere in Chicago, millions of people watched on television and believed, if only for a moment, that fairy tales really can happen. Even the most unlikely ones. Some endings are written in the stars. Others in the heart of a child who always knew that love wins over any business strategy. The garden of the Prescott mansion had been transformed into a dream setting. White flowers wrapped around the trees like scented snow, golden chairs lined an aisle that led to a simple altar decorated with roses and eucalyptus. The Chicago sunset painted everything in shades of gold and pink, and for the first time in months, the mansion felt like a home, not a museum. Rachel took a deep breath in front of the mirror in the master bedroom. The dress was simple, white satin that flowed like water, without glitter or jewels. She had insisted, if I'm going to marry a CEO, at least let me be dressed as myself. Mrs. Patterson, her neighbor who had become the official wedding planner, adjusted the veil for the 3rd time. This dress cost less than my rent, Rachel said, smiling. I think I just broke a few modesty records. Dear, elegance has no price, it has personality. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Noah appeared wearing a perfectly tailored navy tuxedo, bow tie slightly crooked, and a smile bright enough to light up Chicago. Rachel, it's time, he announced like an official master of ceremonies. How do I look? Like a princess, but the kind who knows how to change a tire. She laughed, kissed his forehead, and picked up the simple bouquet of daisies. Let's go marry me to your dad. Let's go marry me to my dad. The music began in the garden, It wasn't the traditional wedding march, but At Last by Etta James, at Rachel's request, because a wedding needs soul, not protocol. Noah ran ahead, tossing rose petals with so much enthusiasm that half of them landed on his own head. The guests laughed, and even the most serious investors melted at the sight. Rachel walked down the flower aisle alone. She had insisted on that too. No one gives me away. I give myself. Damien was waiting at the altar, impeccable in a charcoal gray suit, but with eyes filled with tears in a way he had never shown in public. When she reached his side, he whispered, "You look beautiful." "You're nervous," she replied, noticing his trembling hands. "Completely." The pastor, a young man Rachel had chosen because he looked like someone who really believes what he says, began the ceremony. "We are here to celebrate not only the love between Rachel and Damien, but also the family they have already built." Noah waved proudly from the first row. "Damien, would you like to say your vows?" Damien held Rachel's hands and looked straight into her eyes. "Rachel, you taught me that love is not a contract, it's a legacy. And I want to build that legacy with you, day after day, argument after argument, peanut butter sandwich after peanut butter sandwich." She laughed through her tears. "I promise to love you on the days you burn dinner, on the days you argue with the TV, and especially on the days you remind me that being vulnerable is braver than being powerful." "Rachel?" She took a deep breath. "Damien, you taught me that sometimes love shows up disguised as an impossible boss who doesn't know how to apologize. I promise to teach you to live in my world, where frozen pizza counts as dinner, and where crying during a Pixar movie is completely normal. And I promise that this legacy starts here, in front of all of you, because love that's hidden isn't worth anything." The pastor smiled. "The rings." Noah ran to them carrying the little pillow with the rings. "Don't forget the hearts engraved on them," he announced to the entire audience. When they exchanged rings, Damien whispered, "Now we're officially a family." "Now you're officially responsible for me," Noah added, making everyone laugh. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was soft, full of promises, and lasted exactly as long as it needed to seal a love that had begun with a broken shoe and ended with a mended heart. When they pulled apart, the audience erupted in applause. But that's when Rachel noticed a lone figure on the far side of the garden, almost hidden behind the trees. Harper Collins watched from a distance, dressed in black, alone. No more allies, no more power. Just a woman who had bet on the wrong strategy. For a second, Harper's eyes met Rachel's. There was no hatred there, only exhaustion. Harper turned and disappeared among the trees, like a ghost from a story that had finally come to an end. Damien stepped up to the microphone set near the altar. "Before we head to the reception, we want to officially announce the relaunch of the Prescott Foundation, with a focus on early childhood education and social programs for families in vulnerable situations. Under the leadership of the most qualified CEO I know." He looked at Rachel. "My wife." The applause started again. During the party, as they danced for the first time as husband and wife, Rachel whispered in his ear, "Will someone tell the press that the nanny just got promoted?" "The CEO of my life doesn't need a title," Damien replied. That was when Noah appeared, tugging at the hem of her dress. "A wedding without dancing doesn't count," he shouted. "Now you have to dance every day." Rachel knelt down and pulled Noah onto the dance floor. "Come on then, Mr. Prescott Jr. Let's teach your dad how to really dance." And there, in the garden, lit by the lights of Chicago, 3 people danced as if they were the only ones in the world. Later that night, after the guests had left and the flowers had been cleared away, Noah sat in his room with his laptop open. On the screen, he typed today's story, "How my nanny became my mom." He paused, thought for a moment, and added, "And how my dad finally learned how to truly smile." He closed the laptop, looked out the window at the garden where a few forgotten lights still glowed, and whispered, "Thank you, universe. You too finally understood." And somewhere in Chicago, an entire city slept believing that sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales really do come true, especially when they begin with a broken shoe and end with a whole heart. Do you think Rachel won Damien over with her heart, or with the courage of never bowing to him? And Noah? Do you believe his sweet way was the secret to bringing together the millionaire father and the unlikely nanny? Leave your opinion in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, what score would you give this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get more emotional stories like this. See you next time.